The town by the sea had a rhythm of its own. Every morning before the sun came up, the waves would whisper against the rocks and the boats tied at the dock would sway as if waking from a long sleep. The air smelled of salt and wet wood. It was a simple place where people lived by what the sea gave them and learned to respect what it could take away. Daniel had lived here all his life. He knew the color of the sea in every season, the way the wind changed before a storm and how the sky spoke through its colors. He wasn't a man of many words, but those who knew him said he had a quiet strength. His days began before dawn and ended when the sky turned orange behind the water. He worked hard, fixing his old boat with his own hands, going out to fish even when others stayed home. The ocean was not just his job, it was the only world he understood. His wife, Lena, ran a small cafe near the shore. Every morning when Daniel left with his net and lantern, she would stand by the door and watch until his boat disappeared into the mist. Her life was built around small routines, brewing coffee, baking bread, and waiting for him to come home safe. She often said the sea had taken too much from her already. Daniel never argued. They both knew what she meant. 5 years ago, Daniel's younger brother had gone out to sea during a storm. His boat never returned. The waves carried back a few broken planks, but no sign of him. The town mourned for a few days, then moved on, saying it was nature's will. But Daniel could never make peace with it. He had been there that night, saw the clouds change color, felt the wind go still before the thunder broke. Something about it never felt right. Sometimes, in the quiet of dawn, he thought he heard his brother's voice carried by the wind. That memory never left him, no matter how many times he tried to bury it. Lena could see it in his eyes every time the weather changed. She would tell him to let go, to stop torturing himself, but he would only nod and say nothing. It wasn't grief anymore. It was a question that refused to die. One morning, Daniel woke earlier than usual. The world outside was painted in a strange red glow. The sky wasn't yet bright, but there was a soft, burning line at the edge of the horizon. It wasn't the color of sunrise he was used to. It looked almost like the sky itself was warning him. He walked down to the dock, his boots echoing on the wooden planks. The sea was calm, too calm. He checked his nets, packed some bread Lena had left on the table, and pushed his boat out into the open water. The oars creaked softly as he rowed past the other anchored boats. There was peace in that moment, but also a strange heaviness in the air. He loved these quiet mornings, the kind when the world still slept and the sea looked endless. He always felt closest to his brother during those hours. As the sun began to rise, Daniel thought about the old days, how the two of them would race their boats and argue about who caught the biggest fish. He smiled for a second, but it faded quickly. The water below shimmered, reflecting the red sky like liquid fire. It was beautiful, but also haunting. He threw his nets into the sea and waited. Minutes passed. The sea stayed still. No wind, no waves, only the sound of seagulls circling above. He felt a chill run down his spine. It was unusual for this hour. Usually there was always some movement in the water. He checked his compass. It worked fine. Still, something felt wrong. Daniel decided to move further out where the deeper water began. He rowed until the town was just a shadow behind him. There he saw the same pattern of light in the sky he had seen the night his brother disappeared. The red streak stretched across the horizon like a scar. His breath caught for a moment. It was as if time had turned back. He tried to focus on his work, pulling up his net. It was lighter than usual. Only a few fish. He frowned. Not a good sign, he muttered to himself. The sea, once so generous, now seemed unwilling to share anything. As he looked down into the water, he thought he saw something move. A faint glimmer deep below. Maybe it was just the reflection of the sun, or maybe something else. He leaned closer, but the surface rippled and it was gone. He decided to head back before the weather turned. The clouds were beginning to gather and the light had shifted from red to gray. As he turned the boat, he heard a low sound, a deep hum that came from beneath. It wasn't thunder. It was softer, almost like a whisper. He froze listening. It came again, longer this time, as if the sea was trying to speak. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound itself. By the time Daniel reached the dock, the wind had picked up. He tied the boat quickly and made his way to the cafe. Lena was waiting at the door, worry already written on her face. "The sky looks strange," she said quietly, handing him a towel. He nodded but didn't tell her what he'd heard. There was no point in worrying her. He just said, "Fish weren't biting today." She smiled faintly and told him to eat something. He sat down, feeling the warmth of the food but not really tasting it. His mind was far out on the water. He kept thinking about that sound, the hum under the sea. It felt almost alive. Later that evening, as the sun sank behind the waves, Daniel walked back to the dock. The sky was turning dark, painted with streaks of purple and gold. He stood there for a long time, watching the sea move in slow circles. The water looked calm again, almost pretending nothing had happened. But Daniel knew better. He could feel something beneath that calm, something waiting. A few fishermen passed by, laughing and talking about the coming festival in the town. Daniel nodded politely, but his thoughts were elsewhere. When the wind shifted, he could smell the storm again, the same heavy scent that had filled the air 5 years ago. He closed his eyes and tried to shake it off, but a single memory rose clear in his mind, his brother's hand waving from his boat, disappearing into the fog, and then nothing but silence. He opened his eyes and looked at the horizon. The sky was clear now, but that strange red color still glowed faintly where the sun had been. It stayed there even after the light faded, as if refusing to die. He whispered under his breath, "You're still out there, aren't you?" He didn't know who he was talking to, the sea, the sky, or his brother, but the words felt heavy. The wind carried them away. That night, Daniel lay awake, listening to the distant sound of waves hitting the rocks. Lena slept beside him, peaceful, but he couldn't close his eyes. The red sky, the still sea, the sound from below, they kept circling in his mind. It felt like a message, but he couldn't understand what it meant. Just before dawn, he got up quietly and stepped outside. The air was cold, the stars still bright. The sea shimmered faintly under the moonlight. He stood there for a long time, staring at it. Something deep inside told him that the calm wouldn't last. The sea had hidden something once, and now the sky seemed ready to reveal it. Daniel didn't know what waited for him out there, but he could feel it calling. The story that the sea tried to bury wasn't finished yet, and soon the sky would make sure he found out the truth. The wind had changed. For the next few days, the air carried a strange weight, like a storm was waiting for its moment. The fishermen at the dock talked about it in low voices. Some said the sea had been restless, others said it was just the season. But Daniel knew the sea too well to ignore what he felt. Something was building beneath those calm waves. Every morning he would stare at the horizon before heading out. The water looked normal, but he couldn't shake off the feeling that it was hiding something. Even the birds flew differently, circling lower, quieter. The sky was often covered in a thin gray mist that didn't lift until noon. It was as if the sea and sky were whispering to each other, keeping a secret from the people who lived between them. On the 4th day, Daniel decided to go out earlier than usual. Lena watched him pack his gear. She didn't say much, only reminded him to be careful. Her hands trembled slightly when she tied his lunch in cloth. He smiled, trying to ease her worry, but deep inside he was uneasy too. As he walked toward the dock, he noticed the boats creaking louder than before, their ropes pulling hard against the wooden posts. The smell of rain was faint in the air, though the sky was still dry. He pushed his boat into the open water. The sound of the oars dipping into the sea echoed softly in the silence. There was no other boat nearby, only the vast stretch of gray-blue water. Daniel followed the same path he always did, heading toward the deeper side where the water turned dark. The waves were steady at first, but soon the current began to change direction. It wasn't strong, just unfamiliar, like the sea was gently guiding him somewhere else. The morning light broke through the clouds, but it wasn't the golden color he was used to. It was pale and dim, almost cold. He felt a chill crawl up his back. He took out his compass, but the needle spun slowly, refusing to settle. That had never happened before. He tapped it a few times, thinking it was broken, but it kept moving in circles. He looked around and realized he had drifted to a part of the sea he didn't recognize. The water looked deeper, darker, almost black in some places. He leaned forward, peering into it. For a moment he thought he saw the outline of something below, like the shadow of another boat resting on the seabed. But when he blinked, it was gone. Then the radio on his boat crackled softly, static at first, then a faint voice. It was so weak he could barely make out the words. It sounded like someone saying his name, stretched out by distance and water. He froze, gripping the small radio tightly. He answered, but the voice didn't come again. Only the soft hiss of static filled the air. His heartbeat quickened. That voice, it had sounded so familiar. He switched the radio off and sat quietly for a moment, staring at the waves. Maybe it was just interference, maybe a signal from another boat, but deep inside he wasn't sure. As he turned the boat around, a thin fog began to form. It came quickly, wrapping the sea in a white blanket. Within minutes, Daniel couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. He moved slowly, guiding his boat by memory and instinct. The fog made every sound sharper, the splash of water, the creak of the wood, the beating of his own heart. Then through the mist he saw a faint glow like light reflecting off metal. He rowed toward it carefully. As he got closer, he saw it wasn't just light, it was a shape. A rusted piece of something floating just below the surface. He reached down and lifted it out of the water. It was a piece of metal, old and bent, with faded paint. There were letters on it, worn by salt and time, but he could still make them out. It was part of a boat's name. The name was the same as his brother's old boat. Daniel's hands shook. He stared at the piece for a long time, trying to understand how it could have drifted here after so many years. He had searched these waters before and found nothing, but now, out of nowhere, a piece of that lost boat had appeared. He looked around again, his heart pounding. The fog had thinned just enough for him to see faint outlines of something under the surface, a broken shape lying still. His breath caught. It was the wreck of a boat. He leaned closer, trying to see better. The water rippled, distorting the image, but he could tell it was the same size and shape as his brother's. The roof of the small cabin was broken, and seaweed covered the sides like hair. He tried to memorize the location. Then, just as he reached for his camera to take a picture, thunder rolled in the distance. The fog thickened once more, and in an instant the wreck disappeared from sight. The wind picked up. The waves grew larger, rocking the boat harder. Daniel grabbed the oars and began rowing toward the direction of the shore. But the sea seemed to push him back, pulling at his boat as if trying to hold him there. He rowed harder, his muscles burning, until finally the current let go. The fog followed him halfway back before slowly fading away. By the time he reached the dock, his clothes were soaked and his hands were trembling. The sky above had darkened again, the same strange red hue bleeding through the clouds. Lena was waiting, her face pale. "You were gone too long," she said, her voice low but shaking. He didn't answer at first. He just looked at her, then at the sea behind him. She touched his arm gently. "What happened out there?" Daniel hesitated. He wanted to tell her everything, the fog, the voice, the wreck, but the words wouldn't come out. Part of him was afraid she wouldn't believe him. Another part didn't want to bring her pain back. So he only said, "Something's changing in the sea." That night the wind howled through the narrow streets of the town. Rain fell lightly, tapping against the windows. Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept replaying what he saw, the shape of the boat, the letters on the metal, the voice over the radio. Every detail felt too real to be imagined. Around midnight he got up and went outside. The storm clouds had passed, but lightning still flashed far over the water. For a moment one of those flashes lit up the sea, and he thought he saw the outline of a boat out there again, a ghostly shape resting on the water before fading with the next blink of light. He went back inside, his heart heavy. Lena was awake, sitting by the window. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked quietly, as if she already knew. He looked at her in surprise. She smiled sadly. "I saw the same sky the night your brother was lost. It looked like this." "I've never forgotten that color." Daniel sat beside her. The room was silent except for the soft sound of rain. He finally said, "I think the sea's trying to tell me something." Lena looked down, her eyes glistening. "Maybe it's time you listen?" Her words stayed with him the rest of the night. He realized the sea wasn't just haunting him, it was leading him. The next morning, when the sun rose pale over the horizon, Daniel stood by the dock again, staring at the endless blue. The waves looked gentle, pretending to be innocent, but he knew better now. The sky had seen what the sea tried to hide, and he could feel it calling him back. This time, he wouldn't ignore it. The morning after the storm, the town looked different. The air was heavy and still, as if the sea had swallowed all the sound. The boats at the dock sat motionless, their ropes wet and dark. Daniel stood there quietly, staring at the horizon. The sea looked calm again, too calm. It always did that, pretended to be harmless after showing its temper. He hadn't slept much the night before. His thoughts kept circling around the wreck he had seen, the faint voice on the radio, and the strange pull he felt deep inside. He knew that piece of metal wasn't a coincidence. It had come from his brother's boat. The question was, why now? Why after all these years? He had no answer, only a feeling that the sea was done keeping its secret. Daniel decided he couldn't let it rest. He needed to know what really happened that night 5 years ago. He started asking questions around town, trying to act casual. Though his eyes gave away the truth, he was searching for something that others had chosen to forget. At the docks, he spoke to a few older fishermen who had known his brother well. Some shook their heads and walked away as soon as he mentioned that night. Others muttered that the sea takes who it wants and that it was better not to dig into the past. Their fear was clear in their silence. But one old man, sitting alone by the edge of the pier, didn't turn away. His name was Reed, a man who had spent his whole life at sea. When Daniel sat beside him, Reed didn't speak at first. He kept his eyes on the water, smoking a small pipe. After a long pause, he said quietly, "You're not the first to ask questions about that night. Your brother wasn't just caught in the storm, was he?" Daniel froze. "What do you mean?" Reed exhaled slowly, watching the smoke curl in the air. "There were people doing things they shouldn't back then, moving things through the water when the storms came. The Coast Guard wouldn't go out in that weather, and that made it easy for them. Your brother must have seen something he shouldn't have. And the sea. Well, it keeps secrets better than anyone." The words hit Daniel like a wave. "You're saying someone made sure he didn't come back?" Reed didn't answer directly. He looked up at the sky instead, where gray clouds were beginning to form again. Sometimes what the sea hides, the sky remembers. "You saw something out there, didn't you?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "His boat, or what's left of it." The old man's face tightened. "Then it's not over. Be careful, boy. The truth isn't always safe." Daniel thanked him and walked away, his heart pounding. For the first time, he felt closer to an answer, but also closer to danger. The sea wasn't the only one with secrets. Some people in the town knew more than they admitted, and he could sense their unease when he walked past. That evening, he returned home later than usual. Lena was waiting, worry written all over her face. When she saw his expression, she didn't ask what happened. She just said, "Whatever you're chasing, make sure it's worth it." Daniel looked at her, his voice quiet but steady. "It's my brother. I can't stop now." That night he couldn't sleep again. He sat at the table, staring at the piece of metal he had found, running his fingers over the faded letters. The thought of his brother seeing something, knowing something, wouldn't leave his mind. He decided he needed proof, something solid that would show what really happened. The next morning, he packed a small camera, a flashlight, and an old recorder he used for fishing logs. He knew it was risky, but he had to go back to where he saw the wreck. He didn't tell Lena. She would only try to stop him. The sea was calm when he left, but the sky was covered with thin clouds, giving everything a dull silver light. The water reflected the color of the sky, making it hard to tell where one ended and the other began. Daniel followed his compass, marking each point carefully this time. When he reached the place where the fog had appeared before, he slowed down. The waves were gentle, but he could feel the depth below, cold and endless. He turned on the camera and began recording. He spoke softly, noting his position, the time, and what he was looking for. Then he leaned over the side of the boat and lowered his flashlight into the water. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing faint outlines beneath. His heart skipped. There it was again, the shape of the wreck. This time the water was clearer. He could see the curve of the hull, the broken cabin, the rusted edges covered with algae. He even saw something shiny caught in the cracks of the wood. He tied a rope around his waist, took a deep breath, and slipped into the water. It was freezing. The world around him went silent except for the sound of his own heartbeat. He swam closer to the wreck, his flashlight flickering slightly. As he reached the cabin, he saw what the shiny object was, a small bracelet tangled in a piece of net. He knew it instantly. It had belonged to his brother. Daniel grabbed it and looked around, hoping for more clues. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed something strange, a mark on the side of the wreck not caused by rocks or weather. It looked like a scrape from another boat. He swam closer, tracing the edge with his fingers. There was paint from another hull embedded in it. Blue paint. His brother's boat had been white. That meant another boat had been there, and it had hit or pushed his brother's. Suddenly, the pieces began to fit together in his mind. His brother hadn't been alone that night. Daniel surfaced, gasping for air. The wind had picked up while he was underwater, and small waves slapped against his boat. He climbed in, shivering, and checked his camera. It had recorded everything. Relief mixed with fear. If what he suspected was true, someone in town was responsible for his brother's death. He rowed back quickly, his hands stiff from the cold. When he reached the dock, the sun was setting behind the clouds, turning the sky into shades of gold and gray. He hid the camera in his jacket and hurried home. Lena met him at the door, alarmed by how pale he looked. "You went back, didn't you?" she whispered. Daniel nodded. He placed the bracelet on the table. Lena covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. "That was his," she said softly. "I found it near his boat," Daniel replied. "And there's more. Another boat was there that night." She stared at him, fear and hope mixing in her face. "You think someone did this on purpose?" He nodded slowly. "I don't think. I know." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The sound of waves crashing against the rocks filled the silence. Finally, Lena said, "If you go to the police, they'll need proof. You have to be careful. Whoever was involved might still be here." Daniel looked out the window at the darkening sea. The clouds had begun to thicken again, lightning flickering far away. "The sea kept this secret for years," he said quietly. "But the sky saw it all. Maybe it's time the world saw it too." That night, rain began to fall again, soft at first, then harder. Daniel sat by the window watching the drops race down the glass. His brother's bracelet lay on the table beside the camera. The truth was finally surfacing, but it felt heavy, dangerous. Somewhere out there, someone knew he had found the wreck. As thunder rolled over the horizon, Daniel realized the sea was changing again. The wind carried the same uneasy sound he had heard before, a low hum that rose and faded. He looked out at the dark waves and whispered, "I'm not afraid anymore." For the first time in years, he felt close to his brother, not as a memory, but as a presence guiding him forward. Whatever secret the sea had tried to bury, Daniel was ready to bring it to the surface no matter the cost. The sky had witnessed everything, and now it was finally giving him the courage to face the truth.